Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Coffee and Open Source, a place to meet some new friends, have some great conversations, and maybe learn something along the way. I'm your host, Isaac Levin. And if you're enjoying the interviews here, be sure to like, subscribe, follow wherever you're watching or listening. Also, if you're interested or know any folks that would be interested in coming on chatting, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. My handle there is Isaac R. Levin. All right, with all that out of the way, let's get on and get started. I got my coffee ready. Let's go ahead. Today, I'm excited for my guest today. My guest today is Sarah Lean. Sarah, do you want to say hello? Introduce yourself?
Yeah, Isaac. Thank you for having me. I'm a techie from Scotland, and I'm currently working for Octopus Deploy at the moment. So I'm always rubbish at introducing myself. That always catches me out, Isaac.
No, it's okay. I mean, I think, folks that might be tuning in, they probably know who you are, to an extent. You're like we were talking about a little bit earlier. You do a great job of promoting some of the great stuff that you're putting together. So, but let's go down this path instead. So,
Yeah.
you've been working in technology for a considerable amount of time. Do you
Mhm.
remember kind of what your origin story was, or that point in time where you came across technology and you were like, oh, like this is very interesting. I love this. I want to keep doing this the rest of my professional career or my personal life as well.
Um, yes and no. I didn't want to do technology when I was a kid till kind of late on, just before I finished high school. I actually wanted to be a lawyer or a teacher or do something in farming. To be honest, that was where I kind of was going through high school. And then near the latter stages of high school, I wasn't sure about the college courses and all that kind of stuff. I just wasn't 100% keen on it. And my parents kind of suggested, well, you love computers, you're always on the thing at home,
Sure.
you're helping teachers with it, you're helping friends, you're helping family fix problems and stuff like that. Why don't you think about computing? And also they were saying at the time, Isaac, that computing is the future. There'll be a lot of money
Sure.
in it. So it could be a safe kind of career, and you might find something fun to do and things like that. So yeah, I ended up going to university and doing computing. Kind of fell in love with it there. Fell in love with the student life as well, and then yeah, the rest is kind of history, to be honest.
So I imagine, do your parents still bring that up? Like, do they still say like, your success is because of us telling you to get into technology because we saw an opportunity with you, or are they just happy because you're happy? Like, I'm trying to get a little bit of insights, like what kind of parents you have.
I think they're just happy because
Yeah,
back, when I was a high school student and stuff, I wanted to work for Bill Gates. And
sure.
obviously, I worked at Microsoft for 3, 4 years. So I
Yeah.
kind of ticked that box. So I think they're
Hmm.
just happy that, I've kind of done those goals and achieved that. So yeah, they haven't thrown it back in my face just yet, Isaac. Maybe they will when they're older.
Maybe, or maybe they'll watch this and be like, "We missed an opportunity to give Sarah a hard time." Uh,
Yeah.
it's funny that you mentioned kind of the, when you were younger, you like, I wanted to work for Bill Gates. Like, I came across some of my old stuff from high school
Hmm.
randomly. I don't know why I still have it. But it was senior year of high school. It's like, what do you want to do in a year? What do you want to do in 5 years? What do you want to do in 10 years? And like, the word Microsoft was on this piece of paper like 3 or 4 times. So I'm like, okay, so I guess that's kind of a thing. So
Yeah.
I had an opportunity to work for Microsoft, and like, I guess high school Isaac and today Isaac probably have a very similar interest in things too. So,
Yeah.
I mean, all that's great. So I think, you know, getting really interested in tech early on, maybe by a little bit of influence from your parents is great. Did you at any particular point in time, like, I know like your areas of focus are kind of on DevOps or infrastructure and systems administration. Like, you know, was it that was kind of the thing that was very interesting to you? Like, did you get started working at help desks and stuff like that and kind of move up, or, did you just like come across these sort of concepts like, oh, this is great. I love this.
Yeah, so I remember at high school we had to do some coding and things like that, and the typical Hello World programs and
Yeah.
stuff. And I hated that part of the computing course at high school. I absolutely hated it because I can do it, but I don't get any joy over
Yeah.
finding that semicolon that I've missed and is
Oh,
ruining the
sure.
entire program. Like that doesn't appeal to me. So when it came to the college courses, there were actually two college courses I could pick. One was focusing on like the fundamentals, I say, of computing, and figuring out the history of it, and more focusing on the sysadmin type things. Or there was a developer focus where you would learn a lot of programming languages, and it was really easy for me to pick which one because I knew I didn't enjoy doing the high school classes of like programming, so I would
Mhm.
never enjoy doing that full time at university.
Sure.
So that actually led me down the path of doing the sysadmin and things like that. And like you say, when I left university, I went to help desk and kind of worked my way through the various different levels of support. And yeah, it's been really fun to kind of walk that ladder as such,
Yeah.
up from the help desk and learn from that.
Yeah, my story is kind of similar. I did help desk sort of work like in college. Like I was part of like the local or the university help desk, and I just loved like having conversations with just random people that would just like, hey, I can't do this, and then you strike up a conversation. You're like,
Yeah,
oh, like they seem like a cool person. I also just kind of like the customer service aspect of help desk and that sort of stuff a lot. Um,
yeah,
for folks who know me, I tend to be like some pretty extroverted, so I like just talking, and I think that that's, there's no better opportunity to talk to somebody when they're kind of frustrated, because you can kind of help them not be frustrated anymore. And I think
yeah.
some of the folks I've worked with that are really, really good systems administrators or help desk folk, they're just so good at like alleviating problems, like just like not just the technical problem, but like the emotional problem as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's what some people forget about IT, that there's a lot of customer service and a lot of customer focus in it, because ultimately whatever you're doing, whether you're answering that help desk call or you're architecting a solution with 20 different servers or serverless nowadays, you're fixing someone's problem, you're solving something that they need to do or want to do with IT, and making their life easier. So you have to engage with people in IT. You can't just sit away in a cupboard
Yeah.
and code away all day. You need to be interactive with your end audience, your end users, and being on the help desk really taught me that customer service is at the fore of what we do, and trying to alleviate everybody's problems with IT.
Yeah, I mean it's pretty spot on. Like the fact that it. I also like to tell people that every job is kind of a service job. Like, and if you don't think about it that way, you're probably not being authentic with who your end user is. Like even if you're
Yeah,
a traditional software developer, like you will at some point need to interface with someone that is a customer, right? So
yeah,
having some of those quote unquote soft skills, I really don't like that phrase, but those soft skills around customer service and is really powerful. Like, and
yeah,
we've all worked with folks that might not have those as much, right? Those skills, and it's always a challenge working with them. Let's just say
yeah.
that. One thing that for folks who may not know, like Sarah, she's like I mentioned, she's very, she's active in the community, talking about all sorts of great stuff. Like, so when as you're going through your career and you're kind of
Mhm.
building out like this area of this focus, this systems administrator infrastructure type focus, you kind of then like started to transition into this influencing storytelling, things like blogging or speaking at events. Like what was it about those sort of activities that really excited you?
Not to be honest, I'm not sure, Isaac, because I kind of got into this side of things a bit accidentally, to be
Sure.
honest. So I was at a company who were on-prem focused. They were still doing servers, but it was starting to become clear when I was talking to other friends and other peers and other jobs, they were looking towards the cloud. AWS and Azure were still
Hmm.
baby services. We were still
Sure.
classic Azure portal back then.
Yeah, class or
Um,
Magic Portal.
and there was no material out there to learn about it. Like you don't have the material and the sources that you have nowadays. Like we are so blessed nowadays. We can go on to Twitter, YouTube, blogs, everywhere, and you can learn something. We didn't have that back when I was starting to look out into learning Azure and trying to
Mhm.
upskill myself.
Yeah.
And I noticed there was no user groups actually in Scotland. There was one in London, but that's like a flight away for me or an
Yeah.
8 hour drive. So it's not something I could have attended and just randomly went to. So brave me decided to set up a user group here in Glasgow in Scotland for Azure. And to be honest, that just led me down this path of where I am now. So it's pure just, I want to say luck or being in the right place or chance. So it wasn't ever a decision as such. It was just one of those things. I decided I was going to do it, and then it's led to so many doors opening up for me, to be honest.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. I think, and I'm a true believer in that, like, the things that we have interest in and the things that bring us joy, they find us. Like, if you're out there looking, like, when people ask me occasionally, people want my advice. I have no idea why. And they're like, "Hey, Isaac, how do I get a job in tech?" Or "How do I do this?" And I'm like, "Well, you have to find what is interesting to you. But more importantly, you have to allow things to come to you that you might not think about. Like, for instance, like in your example, you might love, being working in technology, doing these things, but you don't want to be a developer. And a lot of, technology based curriculums are, hey, you're going to be
Mm,
a programmer, or you're going to be a computer scientist, like trying to solve some abstract problem. And, there are a lot of jobs out there that kind of layer of foundation isn't really necessary, right? The hardware side of things is very, very important. The compartmentalization of all the things that we need to manage, like, that's very, very important too. It's like these are business type of skills too. So, like, it's one of those things where if you're not open to new ideas, like, those ideas will never get to you. And, like, I think,
yeah.
your example of starting a user group, like, I think you were just probably looking for keen-minded people, right? Like, hey, I imagine there's more than just me in Glasgow that, like, cares about infrastructure. And
Yeah.
I'd imagine that first meeting, you might not have had a ton of people, but eventually, you realize, oh, like, this is a pretty large community. So, and what did that feel
Yeah.
like?
It was surreal, to be honest, that I
Sure.
had organised that, because the first meetup we had was in a coffee shop, and there was about 5 or 6 of us, and those people are still active in the community, which is
Hmm.
amazing. And then when we had our first actual meetup in a room, we sold out, and there was no seats left. When I say sold out, it's a free event, so but there was no space. There was standing room only type thing, and I just stood at the back of the room and was like, "Did I do this?" Like,
Yeah.
which sounds a bit like big-headed, but also a very proud moment to have that community running. And we've been running since 2017, so
Yeah.
we've been running a long time, and it's still going strong, hopefully. Um, but yeah, it's surreal, to be honest. I think I've done that and achieved that, and I have to pinch myself, to be honest, quite a bit. I couldn't have done
I,
it myself, obviously.
sure.
I've had massive support from the community, but yeah, just from that little idea I had one day at work, has turned into this. So
Yeah, I mean, it's great. Like, I think whenever you have the opportunity to kind of build a community, share the passions that they have, like, that's the reason why I do this silly little thing. Um, Obviously in the last couple of years, like, the whole meetup culture, the whole meetup industry in general has kind of had a bit of struggle, right? Like, how have, the Glasgow Azure group, how have you folks been able to kind of, did you just go straight to virtual and do, like, PowerPoint and demo, or is there, did you try to find opportunities to kind of do some more casual get-togethers as well?
So we went virtual for
Sure.
a lot of the kind of pandemic time, the last couple of years. The restrictions in Scotland have been a bit tight and have
Yeah.
constantly been changing, so it's not been easy for us to figure out the best way of meeting in person, to be quite honest. It was just, as someone who does this in our spare time, I didn't want to have to deal with the logistical
Sure.
challenges of
Yeah.
collecting details and passing that all around and enforcing masks or not enforcing masks. Just was not a headache I wanted to approach, to be quite
No.
honest, from a personal point of view. But
Sure.
fingers crossed, this time next week, we will all be in a meeting room having our first in person meeting of
Oh,
the Glasgow
great.
Azure User Group for like 2 years. So fingers crossed, Isaac, nothing
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah.
But
Knock on every bit of wood that's in this room. Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, it'll be nice to get together again, and do that. Even though this one next week that we're having is going to be kind of informal, I'm just going to
Hmm.
bring some beers and snacks, and I've got some good
Yeah.
quiz prizes and stuff. It'll just be nice to see people and be in the same room of them, and not have this kind of one-way chat that you often have on a virtual
Yeah.
meetup, where everyone's like, "Oh, I'm not coming off mute because I might interrupt everybody else," or "I'm too shy," or
Yeah, I'm very vocal about the fact that, like, the only way that I interface with folks is like through this little thing here, right? Like that's the only way that I have conversation with people now, and it's
yeah,
sometimes it's very very challenging because I personally I like hobnobbing with people and bumping elbows and having a drink and whatever, right?
yeah,
And not having that opportunity as often, it's pretty challenging, right? Like you can kind of get down on yourself. But I also appreciate that not everybody wants to go back as fast as possible. Like,
yeah,
my wife and I, we have conversations all the time about like, we have small kids. Like, what are we? Hey, we're gonna go to a baseball game, or we're gonna go and do something. Like, are we wearing masks? Yes, we should be wearing masks. And I think, like, not everybody kind of has that the same
yeah,
level of comfort, right? So making sure that you have empathy for everybody, right? Like in your example, like I bet you a lot of people are very very excited. Also, some people are like, "Nah, I'm gonna skip that one,"
mm,
and
yeah,
that's cool. Like as long as you give everybody the opportunity, like maybe you'll have like a TV screen somewhere, or somebody will be on their phone and like whatever, right? I think that there's tons of opportunity to be creative with that sort of stuff.
yeah. I think we're gonna have to look at going forward. This one's just a social
Yeah,
meetup, so it'll not be hybrid, and I'm not going to
yeah,
put cameras in people's faces and stuff. But
sure.
it'll be interesting going forward how we do the logistics of doing a hybrid meetup, and if we do
Hmm.
that, because you know yourself, Isaac, and I'm sure a few of your listeners will know, doing the kind of hybrid meetup is not as simple as turning your webcam on the
Yes.
presenter's laptop, because you have to have good quality camera, and if your
Hmm.
presenter's moving around and their laptop's over on a podium, you lose them, and then the sound's not there, and then you have to have like microphones, and then if your audience want to ask questions, you need to have a moving microphone so as
Yeah.
everybody can hear. And to a certain extent, I kind of want to do that, but then to another extent, I don't want to do that, because I loved the small nature, the kind of private community in a way where people could ask questions that weren't recorded. They could have open conversations with each other. They weren't worried about any of that, or they weren't frightened about having
Yeah.
to be on camera. So it's going to be an interesting one, whether we go hybrid or whether we
Yeah.
just go in person only. And it's a constant debate I'm having with myself, to be honest. So I don't know what we're
Oh,
going to do going forward.
when for folks that don't know this, Sarah and I, well, you wouldn't know this obviously. Sarah and I were chatting about this exact hybrid sort of thing before we went live, right? Like how anybody figures out the hybrid situation, regardless of your company size, whether you're,
Yeah,
a local meetup or you're a huge company that has events that has 40, 50,000 people. Like, how do you figure out a way to make sure that you're inclusive and have that empathy for all of your audience in person and virtual at the same time and have
yeah,
both different audiences have the same experience? I know, Sarah, you've been in person. Like that energy is like it's
yeah,
infectious, right? Like, being able to walk through a Microsoft build or an AWS reInvent or what have you, and like be able to talk to the product group, be able to tune into
yeah,
sessions, walk in, see your favorite tech celebrity present in front of a couple thousand people, right? Like
yeah,
that sort of energy, it's very, very hard to replicate over
yeah,
a
for
screen.
sure.
Not to mention the fact that I'm very vocal about the fact nobody actually watches virtual events. It's on some other screen while they're doing work. And maybe occasionally like they'll hear something that's interesting, like, "Oh, okay, like maybe I'll pay attention to that the next time I have a minute." But for the most part, no one takes 2 or 3 days off to go and watch like all the sessions for build or all the sessions for reinvent. Maybe some have that luxury. I know one person in general that is very very active on Twitter during every single session of some of these virtual events, and I'm like, how do you do this? You
Yeah.
have some sort of wizardry. But I think, there is something to say about that balance because the virtual events, I think we all can agree, like there's challenges there. The in-person events, at least until there is no more pandemic, which I honestly
Mm,
don't think that will ever be the case.
yeah.
That's a challenge for some folks as well. So this hybrid thing, I feel like there still needs to be some hybrid-ish type things forever. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I think so. I think certainly for the bigger events, like the companies that have the ability to, pay for the cameras and the
Hmm.
producers and have all that technology.
Yep.
It's going to be interesting from the local community point of view, which is maybe where I focus a bit more on,
Yeah.
because they don't have the same budget
Hmm.
and you maybe don't have the same presence and you don't have the same time to invest in making it possible, because a lot of your local meetups, like I know I do all of the Glasgow Azure User Group stuff in my spare time, so I only
Yeah.
have a limited amount. So if I had then had to dedicate more to it, that it all mounts up. So I think, like you say, there'll be an element of virtual all the time. And I think we've had that luxury of having speakers from all over the world. I've pulled on people who are in your part of the world, in
Yeah.
Seattle, and things like that, in Australia and New Zealand, and I've spoke at these kind of events. And I think that's fantastic, because I would never be able to fly across the world and do these like 20-minute meetups
Yeah.
and things like
Exactly.
that. So it's going to be not lesser, because we haven't got that same speaker pool, but you're going to have a smaller speaker pool and you're going to have a smaller audience and you're going to miss out on stuff. So there's a lot of things that people are going to have to think about now, being in person, and how you do that, how you include everybody who, may not never want to come to another in-person event,
Yeah.
because let's face it, there are people, and I've got some friends and stuff that are just still too nervous to go
Hmm.
out, even though they're fully vaccinated. Things are getting slightly better in terms of healthcare and stuff. They don't want to go back to work. They
Yeah.
don't even want to go back to going to like supermarkets and things like
Yeah.
that, Isaac. So going to a 40,000 person event
No.
conference is
No.
not on the agenda ever for them, and for them to have to miss out because I maybe wouldn't want to put a camera in my meetup
Yeah.
is a bit it's a bit selfish to a
Sure.
certain degree. So yeah, there's lots to think about.
Oh, I mean, I think that there's lots of problems to solve, and I think a lot of people are trying to solve those problems in different ways. I think one
Yeah,
thing that you said that's really, really interesting too is in the virtual world, like virtual meetup, virtual event world, like the one of the big things that audiences gained is the opportunity to hear from folks that they would, like you said, never have the opportunity to hear from. Like
yeah,
you're not going to fly to Australia to present at, the Sydney infrastructure group, right? Like you're never going to do that. Like
yeah,
I'm not going to typically like fly to Prague and present for an hour, right? I mean, I've had the opportunity to speak internationally before, but like typically, like there's
yeah,
logistical nightmares getting from the west coast of the U.S. to Europe. Let's just say that.
yeah,
Like I was joking with my wife. It's like it's flying for 3 days. It's lit like between the time zone difference. Like if it's
yeah,
a 15 hours of flying plus like 9 hours, like it's over a day of actually like traveling. I wake up in the future, like way in
yeah,
the future. Uh, so so getting access to those sort of folks and getting like those different points of view, and you know maybe you get an opportunity to see somebody that like, oh, I've only ever seen them at Build, or I've only ever seen them at reInvent, or I've only followed them on Twitter, but now I can like pay attention. I can go to one of their sessions and I can
yeah,
listen to them and I can have a conversation with them afterward, and it's not weird,
yeah,
right? And I think that's really valuable for folks. And I don't want that to go away completely, because maybe I'm a little bit selfish. Like, I would love to continue to be able to interact with folks that I would never typically have the opportunity to. So again, hard problems that need to be solved.
yeah, for sure.
Uh, one of the things that you did mention too, or we were talking about, is like the public speaking thing. Like, what was it about public speaking that, has interested you? Like, is it the storytelling aspect? Is it kind of are you a little bit of an extrovert like me, where you kind of, that energy of being on stage excites you? Is it, you just like the challenge? Like, what are some of the reasons why you love presenting?
Probably all of the above, to be
Sure.
honest, Isaac. I wouldn't class myself as an extrovert. I can be an extrovert when I need to. I can
Sure.
turn that tap on and turn that off. Um, so yeah, it's part of that, being on stage, the energy that you get from doing that and having an audience that, are really interactive and enjoying, and, finding your presentation useful, is exhilarating, and it's kind of a buzz that you want to go back to every now and again. But also the challenge of learning something and then having to, teach it or present it to another bunch of folk. And I think that's one of the best ways of learning something because you can learn something and use it and do it in your day job. But being able to explain that and go into depth or answer questions from other people, that's when you really know you
Yeah.
know something. I'm an Azure person. I think anybody that knows me knows that that's my kind of forte. Azure
Sure.
has been, but the last 3 or 4 weeks, I've been diving into AWS, and I literally just presented today on AWS Cloud Formation, and that was a massive challenge for me.
Yeah.
Learning, well, I've dabbled in AWS before, right? But I actually had to learn it because I had to do like
Yeah.
a 45-minute presentation. Like I
Sure.
couldn't just
Can't fake it.
fake it until I
No.
make it.
No.
And I had to build the slide deck, I had to do the demo, I had to, anticipate questions that people might ask me, I had to do research, I had to watch other people presenting the topic and stuff. So that challenge of doing that, of forcing myself off almost to learn something to help other people, that's also a part of it, for me. And whether that ends in me creating a video or a blog post or a presentation, that's the part of the job that I love, helping other people, by being able to learn something and then redigest or show them how to do it as well.
Sure. Here's a question for you, and I have a preference as somebody who's done a good amount of public speaking. What do you enjoy more about public speaking? Is it the being on the stage part, talking and watching people smile and hopefully like nod with you, or is it afterwards when just a queue happens of people that want to ask you a question or give you feedback or talk to you? Which one do you enjoy more?
That's a tough one
I
because
know.
I've enjoyed both of it. Like
Yeah.
I can remember just before the pandemic hit in 2019, I was presenting at Ignite in person in Florida, and I presented on this massive stage, Isaac. Honestly, it was huge. Like, and I'm a small
Yeah.
person, so the stage was massive. And I thought I'd done a rubbish job. I genuinely thought I hadn't done what I should have done. But then there was a queue of people at the end of the presentation coming up to ask me a question. And I'm telling you, that buzz, that
Yeah.
feeling was amazing. But equally, when I don't get that, I still get a buzz because, like you say, there'll be people that are nodding and you can see the kind of
Yeah.
clogs ticking,
Yep.
and you're like, the penny has dropped for them about that bit of information you've just gave, or even just the joke you've told on stage,
Yeah.
and they're laughing with
I get a little
you.
smile.
That
Yeah.
can that's fun as well, and I have moments where I remember, audiences doing that and laughing, taking pictures of the weird slides that I've designed because they want to
Yeah.
share that on Twitter. Yeah, I enjoy both, to be honest, Isaac. That's a
Yeah.
hard one to answer.
It's definitely so my preference it like I never realized this until my wife told me. My wife she's had a couple of opportunities to like see me present at some events, and she was like, you are far more excited about talking to people afterwards than you are presenting. And
Mm,
I said, and I immediately, as kind of a pessimist, I'm like, okay, well, I definitely don't have enough energy when I'm presenting. And she's like, no, like, because one of the things is about me is I hardly ever make eye contact with people. Like
mm,
it's one of my things. I don't know why. I don't really make eye contact. Like I tend to kind of look away or look off to the side or look behind or through people. But she said like I've never seen you actually like make eye contact with people consistently. And like after this particular example, like you were making eye contact and being like very thoughtful and approachable with all these folks, and you like I've never seen you make eye contact before. So in my head I'm like, oh well, that means that I must have been really enjoying myself and felt comfortable, because I'm guessing the reason why I don't look at people is because I don't feel comfortable. Maybe I don't know.
yeah.
um but I like you mentioned something like the you the funny slides, or you crack a joke, people smile. Like I tried for a long amount of time to like try to make as many people in the audience laugh. And I would be
Mm,
very guilty of like staring at like, because one of the things I saw myself doing is I would kind of hyper focus on the people that I guess quote unquote were getting it, and that's not a great experience for the rest of the audience, right? Because
yeah.
I'm getting that positive feedback from one person, and the rest of the people are like, well, why are they staring at one side of the screen, one side of the stage the whole time?
Yeah.
Um, and so like I kind of in my brain like, okay, I need to get 10 nods or 10 laughs or whatever it is. And that would, okay, I got this person. Now I got to go somewhere else. And I would do that, and that's helped me, a little bit with stage presence, like making sure that everybody feels like they're being a part of the show. What are some of the things that you've done to kind of make sure that you that your story or the thing that you're trying to do is getting to your audience? Like, are there, certain quirks that you have? Like you mentioned funny uh, decks and things like that, which I think is great. Or is there anything else?
It's interjecting personal stories, I
Yeah.
think, at times. And I'm sure we probably all do this as presenters, but when you hit a slide that's maybe boring,
Yep.
or you're halfway through the slide deck and you can see people, well, before you could see people reaching for their phones or
Move
trying to,
on. Yeah.
fidgeting. Yeah. I would I would try and think of a story from, my help desk days where I could relate it back to what we're talking about, and try and make them laugh so that they would look back up from their phone.
Yep.
Didn't always work.
Sure.
Sometimes occasionally, like, I try to do a bit of Scotland into my presentations. So I used to teach people some Scottish words, translate it
Oh,
from the
cool.
English word into some Scottish words. That would always make people laugh. I've started now doing a picture of a Highland cow, which is, the fuzzy Highland cows you always see as a Scottish tourist with the horns and stuff.
Yep. Yep.
So sometimes I'll put that at the start of my slide deck. Other times I've been putting that in the middle of the slide deck and catching people out, because I'm like, are you listening to me? I want to bring your attention back to me, and I
Yeah.
tell a little story. Um, I don't have a theory. I just try things differently. And I think it's a lot harder now when you don't have a camera often on the audience, or people
Yep.
have turned their cameras off. So I don't know if any of the things I'm trying, Isaac, these days are actually working.
Well,
So
I mean, it's very interesting. Like getting into getting having that mental thing of like, people, do people actually care? Are people actually paying attention? And I know that's harder with virtual. Like I think one thing that's very interesting too, like at least in person, you have the ability to kind of get, read the room, right? Like I think you're completely correct that like if somebody wanted like the interactive version of like docs, like
mm,
that's a whole different thing. But people don't want that. Like people want anecdotes. They want storytelling. They want to learn more about you as a presenter. They want you to crack really corny jokes. Like that's the whole point of it. I think like the folks that are most successful public speaking, that it's very like it's a conversation. It's not like a presentation. I think too, one thing that's very very interesting that you said is like, you know let's just be fair. You're from a part of the world that not a lot of people have a lot of familiarity with, like especially like tech audiences, right? I don't
yeah.
know per capita like how many people in tech in Glasgow or in Scotland in general, but it's less than probably in the US, and it's probably less than other
Mm,
parts of the world, right? So you have a unique ability, a unique opportunity to like tell a little bit more about where you're from, or like you mentioned, like you come from an agricultural background, like you've worked in some fields that are probably not immediately thought of for folks. Like one of the things about Sarah, while I was kind of diving a little bit deeper into kind of her background, is like she has experience like in the whiskey business, right? Like it's so I I like a good whiskey, but like I would never think of like, oh, can I go and work at a whiskey distillery? Probably not. But you've had the opportunity to do those sort of things, and I think those sort of stories are really captivating for folks. Now I need to know like, what did you do? And you don't need to name businesses or anything like that, but what did you do at what in the whiskey? What's your been experience in the whiskey business?
so I worked in the IT department on their help desk, actually, or kind of desktop support. And so it was a company called William Grants and Son. They make like Glenfiddich and things like that. So yeah, we had the different sites. So we had like our office where everybody, your finance,
Mm-hmm.
your HR department. So we had that office, but then we also had like the distilleries up
Yep.
north, which were interesting because they are not IT offices. So
Sure.
often you'd have to go up and the PC would be covered in dust and
Yeah.
crap, basically, from the distillery. And they'd be like, my keyboard's not working. And you're like, yeah, it's covered in like 3 years worth of dust. Maybe get a Hoover occasionally or a vacuum on it. Or I've had funny stories of tracing cables and finding like mice have eaten it and stuff like that. So there's lots of little anecdotes that you could tell. And different things. I've seen all behind the scenes of what happens in a whiskey distillery and things like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was a great time that I kind of pull on to trying to pull some stories and late night, escapades in the whiskey distilleries and stuff and bottling
Yeah.
halls and all sorts of things. So again, there's lots of opportunities where you can find little anecdotes, no matter where you've worked
Yeah.
and what your career's been, to interject into presentations. But like you say, it's something that people can come and ask me about because I sometimes mention it again in presentations, and I'll get people coming up afterwards, and that's how they start a conversation because they're like, "Oh, I love that whiskey," or
Mm-hmm.
"I love Scottish whiskey," and they can start a conversation, and it's really easy to relate to someone if someone's shy or they don't know how to approach you or that kind of thing. So yeah, I think I've gone off on a tangent now, Isaac.
No, no, like the whole point of the show is somebody giving me an opportunity to take a breath because I tend to go on tangents as well. And I think, folks want to hear like, what you're passionate about. And I think that's, some people, like let's be completely real, are very, very passionate about whiskey. Like you can
Yeah,
have conversations with people like I remember have like, after presenting at a conference, like speakers would go out and they'd go and have some spirits and have some good time. And like there's some people that are very serious about their whiskey, right? And I think, being able to, you know, especially when you talk with the audience, is like maybe that one individual that, oh, I love that whiskey, but I never really thought about working at a distillery. Maybe I could take some of my skills and kind of combine that with something that I kind of also have a personal passion for, and maybe they'll have an opportunity to work there, right? Plus,
yeah.
I mean, I imagine the swag is absolutely great working at a whiskey distillery,
Oh yeah.
or the employee discounts or the employee perks. I could only imagine. I could only imagine.
Yeah, we used to at the end of every quarter, we'd have an allocation of points, and then we could go and use those points in the staff shop and buy booze.
Oh,
So yeah, the
yeah.
perks were quite good, Isaac.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, at least in this day and age, I think for you to be a successful business, you have to have great employee perks. And nothing is, I think, getting a good bottle every now and then is a very, very strong company perk. To transition a little bit away from alcohol choices, I think one thing that's really exciting to me, as somebody who follows you, is like all this sort of really really great content that you put together, like around DevOps, right? Like,
Yeah.
what is it so much about DevOps that excites you? Like, I am excited about DevOps for my own reasons. I'd love to kind of hear what yours are.
I think it's about solving the challenges that we have in terms of the infrastructure side of things. I can imagine that you love it from the developer point of view, but for me, I remember, physically building servers, like lifting them out of box, putting them in the rack, fighting with the little server rack screws and putting it all
Mm-hmm.
in and cabling it and all the fun that you would have about finding the right CD and making it boot and installing all the
Yeah.
firmware, all that fun, right? We don't necessarily have that nowadays in terms of infrastructure deployments, or we're moving away from it. However, there are still challenges about building servers.
Yep.
If someone says, I need a server, or I need this bit of infrastructure, or I need you to, fire up something and make it secure, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
um, solving those challenges and making them almost self-service and repeatable is where I find the fun in doing the DevOps, because I could tell you stories about people coming to me and saying I need a database, I need a server
Yeah.
back in the day, and I'm like, okay, when do you need it? I need it now. And I'm
Yeah.
like, well,
Yeah.
it's going to take me like 10 hours or something to build it
Yeah.
and get it
Mm-hmm.
up to the spec, even with the automation that we had back then. And they would be frustrated with that. But being able to solve those challenges with DevOps and making it self-service so that they can go into a portal
Mm-hmm.
or run a script or something, whatever it may be, and do all that themselves and be compliant, but also get the answer to their problem that they need is kind of the fun bit that I enjoy seeing. Just solving those challenges that we couldn't solve years ago because we didn't have the technology,
Yeah.
being able to be solvable, and helping other people just answer those queries, those weird and wacky questions that you get, and we try and fix them as IT professionals. That's the fun. It's the solving the problem ultimately, Isaac. I've said that in about 1,000 words, but
No.
ultimately what I enjoy
No.
about it is solving the problem.
Yeah.
That still excites me.
I will say this anytime somebody asks me, if in all of technology, the folks that have the best stories are help desk and systems administrator folks, because it's always like some weird, like you said, wacky request or something that's completely out of left field, and there's always an assumption like, oh, like you can just like give me an IP address and it's done, right? It's like,
Yep.
yeah, we just have IP addresses that are pointing to stuff like costing money at all times. Like, let me give you one of those cool IP addresses. And I know the cloud to an extent has kind of done that, right? Like,
Yep.
folks joke about like how systems administrators like their resume or their CV goes from like 5 pages to 2 pages because now it's all slider bars and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
I think that there is something to that, but I think you're one of the things that I really respect about the whole like IT practitioner or systems administrator kind of persona in this new world is that the ability to completely pivot their way of thinking, right? Like like you said, not having to worry as much about the physical screwing in a server. Sure, some companies still do that, but if you're
Yep.
cloud based, like you're very dependent on other companies' services, right? Like, oh, like this particular region of AWS, like I can't create more VMs in it. Why can't I create more VMs in it? Right? Like so these sort of things happen all the time. And
Yeah.
it even becomes more of a customer service sort of role because now like you don't own the actual service. And like you own basically an abstraction of the service, which I
Yep.
can only imagine makes it even more challenging when you run into issues with people are having.
Yeah, I think as sysadmins, or at least me, I was always paranoid when I was running those on-prem infrastructure. So I was always scope them a little bit bigger, or I would have more DR plans and backup plans than I probably needed, because of reality. But in the cloud, you have no control over any of that to a certain degree. So if
Yeah.
we lost a region, if something happened, you have no ability to fix that. You can't run down to your server room, Isaac, and spin up this old bit of server that's running
Yeah.
and try and make that work, or you don't have the ability to change the cable if something has broken. You have to rely on other people. So it there's different challenges. The cloud solves a ton of challenges for people, but it also introduces a whole other
Yep.
bunch of challenges or paranoia, depending on how you want to look at it. And that's the transition that a lot of people are trying to make and fun. And I think that's still, again, trying to solve those problems of how do you make it cost effective, but not be too paranoid and have, a server of a bit of service in about 6 different regions.
Yeah.
And things like that, and just thinking about it and thinking about the challenges of how you change it. Because, like, for example, and again, I'm probably going off on a tangent, but I was looking at AWS again, and the kind of, if you look at the compute, like the virtual machines or EC2 instances, their images are all very different within a region. They all have
Yep.
very different ID. You don't have that inside Azure. If you want to spin up like a Windows Server 2019 box or a 2022 box, the code is the same
Yeah.
regardless of where you're deploying it, but it's not in AWS. So how do you make your disaster recovery? How do you make your cloud formation templates adapt to that if you
Mm-hmm.
have to spin up something really quick? There's a whole other
Yeah.
different bunch of challenges that you have to fix. So yeah, there's always a problem to solve, and I think anyone in IT is always going to be in a job at the moment.
Yeah, I have such a ton of empathy for folks, especially that need to like care about like more than one cloud, right? Because the implementation model is so different between, major clouds and even some of the minor clouds too. Like it just
Yeah.
becomes really, really challenging to like speak the language of all this, like learning like spoken languages, right? Like you said, oh, this one script, like if I run it against Azure it'll work, but AWS not so much. And I know there's some tools that exist there to make that experience a bit better, but it's still very, very challenging. And it goes back to like this conversation I think that we keep having about it's like about being very flexible and providing a
Hmm.
service that, quite frankly, it's way complicated, like far too complicated for end users typically. Even if your end user is like a developer, I'm a
Yeah.
developer. I really don't care about like all of the crazy things that come with Windows Server. I really don't. I don't. I'll like give me IIS or give me some web server or give me
Yeah.
some Windows Service capabilities, but everything else that like you folk as infrastructure people have to worry about. I'm like, no, I can't. Like
Yeah.
I gotta worry about stuff that I actually understand.
And I think that's kind of where DevOps is trying to make us all work better together
Hmm.
because, I think we've always tried to work better or work together well, whether you're developer, database person, sysadmin, but there was always conflicts and there was always maybe physical partitions that would, stop you from being a team as such, and you'd be compartmentalized into
Yeah.
your specialities. But this DevOps culture is bringing us all together and trying to make us better. You don't need to understand what my job is, Isaac. I don't need to understand what yours is. But as long as we can communicate and work together, then we can make it better. And I think that's the thing that we're trying to be better at. I'm saying
Yeah.
better a lot.
That's fine. That's fine. I mean, like at the end of the day, all we're doing in technology is trying to solve problems, right? So if you and I can work together a better way, it's going to land like the ability to solve problems better. And I think that's really a lot of, and this probably isn't fair to say, I think a lot of folks might not be so hyper focused on that. Like they're worried about, oh, I want to use this tool, or I want to use this, practice, or like we have to use this particular cloud provider, or we have to need like this size VM, or whatever it is, right? But it's like at the end of the day, like what's the business problem you're trying to solve? Because without the business problem, like none of us have jobs. Like none of us like there's no money there's no money in technology unless it's trying to solve a business problem. So like the question then becomes, okay, what's going to give me the fastest resolution that's scalable, that's going to solve this business problem? And that's where I have skills, you have skills, database folk have skills, people that have, that maybe are more familiar with some of the different patterns that exist out there in a cloud native world, like they have skills. Like all of these
Yeah.
folk, we all need to work together to make the company we work for money. And if we don't do that, then we're all out, right? And I think
Yep.
that's really important to just level set with folks. I do it all the time at work. Like, remember, the goal is to always make money. We are always in, every single person in this room is in sales. Like, even if you're just writing code every day, you're in sales because you're building something that is going to advocate for more sales. So, it's it's definitely interesting having those sort of conversations. Let's just say that.
Yeah. 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 I could tell you a few war stories around that, but maybe in a pub next time, Isaac,
Yeah.
we see
Oh,
each other.
no, I definitely, yeah. I think one of the things that, tech people love to do in general is to kind of, you know, is to just, I don't want to say complain, but talk about experiences they've had in their career that are a bit outside the box, right? And
Yeah.
I think that's what's really, really interesting about my job. And I can imagine you probably feel the same way about your job, is that every single day you wake up and the problem is always a bit different, right? Especially like in your world and in my world too, where we're trying to build content or build some assets that are going to help evangelize or help market something, right? Because if we just talked about the same thing over and over and over again, like nobody would tune in, right?
Yep. Yep. It's a constant battle of trying to figure out what the next problem is for your audience or what's the next thing that they want to hear about. Because, and again, the webinar I've just done on AWS Cloud Formation, I've got about 6 things I could
Yeah.
build out from that
Yeah.
because maybe someone's asked me a question post webinar and I was like, oh, I should have covered that. But you know what? I can build another video. I can do
Mm-hmm.
another blog about that and dig into that and find out the answer and go deeper onto that. So yeah, there's always a problem to solve, and I think um, it would be nice to not have a problem to solve, but then
Sure.
also I enjoy my job, so I want all the problems.
Yeah. Maybe problem isn't the best word. Maybe it's opportunity, right? Like there's other
Yes.
opportunities to kind of flesh out. Like I was watching on TikTok and there's this content creator that was kind of going through like how they build content. And like
Mm,
they'll record like a 20-minute podcast or something, and then like all the different trees that they create extra content from that original asset, right? And I think that's one thing as well that's really, really important is like your story, for instance, right? Where, oh, I should have talked about this. Yeah, you just do something else. You just build another thing. And like, cause the story, like the opportunities, right?
yeah,
Like the story never really ends, right? Like it might, it's like a river, right? To use a really cliche phrase, like it's always changing and it's always going to give you different opportunities to kind of navigate, right?
Yeah. And I think there's kind of the way I think about it when I create content is how can I reuse what I've just
Yeah.
created? So I've spent like 3 or 4 weeks learning something or diving into something, and then I build a presentation that's 45 minutes or whatever Isaac say.
Hmm.
How can I reuse that? Can I
Yeah.
take snippets of that to maybe put on TikTok or as a YouTube short, or can I use it as a 10-minute video and cut it down and condense the important parts? And then, like you say, there's the branches off that, like where's the content that I missed potentially, or I can dive into deeper because people have asked me questions. So yeah, it's an interesting work stream that I now have to do in terms
Yeah.
of content creation. But yeah, it's fun. It's fun trying to do it.
Yeah. What's so, what is like the, I know that you just spent a good amount of time learning some AWS cloud formation stuff. Like, have you already started to like, do you have like are you one of those folk that have like a to-do list of like, these are all the topics that I want to learn in the next 3 or 4 months? Are you one of those people? Or are you
Oh
more
yeah.
like, when you finish the thing, you're like, okay, now what?
No, I have a never-ending list of
List? Yeah.
to-do items. I've got like a list of certifications that I want to pass this year. Whether I'll get them all done, that's probably
Sure.
an ambitious list. I've also got a list of things that I want to do for work, and then I've got a list of content and things I want to dive into for my personal, like career path and things like that. So yeah, it's a never-ending to-do list that I tick one thing off, Isaac, and add about three to every time. So
I'm so bad with like, I think that's my problem with lists, is that I always seem to be adding to the list and never removing stuff from the list. So like, whenever I do a to-do list, there's like 40 things in there. I'm like, okay, this is exhausting. And I'll remove
yeah,
one, but then I'll add like six things. So I mean,
yeah,
I guess it just goes to show that I'm trying to solve like a bunch of problems, or trying to uh, raise some new opportunities. That's
yeah,
great. But in my brain, when like, I very much am that person that like, I like seeing count zeros on stuff. So like, mailboxes or on GitHub issues or whatever. Like, I'm definitely a zero person, and when I don't see zero, like, I get very anxious. Right. So I
yeah,
think you have to be okay with like that feeling of like, things aren't complete yet. You have to be a little
yeah.
bit comfortable with that.
Yeah, and I think to be honest, that's why I use physical to-do lists. Like I still have pen and paper for my to-do
Okay.
list because I love that accomplishment of putting a tick in the box or
Hmm.
scoring it out, Isaac. And I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, today was a good day. I scored two things off the list, and that physical feeling of doing that it is reassuring. You don't
Sure.
necessarily get that with some of the icon like the apps. I know some of them like play funky music and a
Yeah.
little like celebration
Yeah.
comes up on your screen that hasn't like ticked the box for me. I
Hmm.
have to do it physically. I can't use the electronic to do apps. I need that physical experience
Yeah.
of ticking something off.
No, that's probably valid too. Like, I'm very guilty of using like a to-do list or whatever, like app of choice. There's a million of them.
Yeah,
And yeah, you click the thing and it goes away. And you're like, oh, I guess there's no record of me ever doing something good, which I think is a problem. I think for kind of mental
yeah,
well-being. Like, I think to your point, you need to physically see the accomplishments, right?
yeah,
Otherwise they didn't exist. Like, in 6 months, are you going to remember that like you said, I had a great day 6 months ago because I crossed out two things? Or are you going to remember that if that scored through sentences and get there, right?
exactly. Yeah, I like that. Even at the end of the week, when I look at my to-do list, like I've got some things that are scored out. So even if they're not all scored out, I'm like, I achieved some stuff. I ticked some boxes. I scored some things off. So it's that mental feeling of doing it. And like you say, when you do it electronically, they disappear. There's no record of them, and you're
Mm-hmm.
you're just left with a bunch of 40 other things that you haven't
Yeah.
accomplished and feel like a mountain. So yeah, that's been a learning curve trying to figure out the best way of managing the ever-growing to-do list. And I think everyone's different, but yeah, I prefer the physical method of doing it.
So what's the next? If you look at your list, like, what's the next thing? Like, what's the next big thing that you want to tackle?
Um, I want to tackle, is there an ideal CI/CD pipeline, Isaac? I want to dive into that and figure out what the answer, if there's an answer to that,
Yeah.
and spark debate and dive off because there's thousands of other things I could dive off into that and have a whole branch off of what everything is that you would potentially have in a CI/CD pipeline. But I think that's the next thing I want to challenge. I want to challenge myself and have a look at figuring out the ideal CI/CD
That's
pipeline.
a that's an interesting one. I mean, that's a bit of a big reach, I will say. There's lots of tools and lots of companies, maybe one of us works for one, that they've kind of, you know, tried to solve the problem. Maybe not
Yeah.
100% of the way, but try to solve the problem, right? And I think that's really great example, because I think some of the learnings that you'll probably gain, hopefully you have the opportunity to bring it back to the business and say, like, look, like, I did all this research, and I think this are some of the things that constitute a great DevOps lifecycle, right? From a deployment standpoint or an integration standpoint. And these are some of the things that maybe we don't do the way we should be doing, right? So
Yeah.
creating opportunities for the business, which, I mean, that is a good thing to be doing, is creating opportunities for the business.
Yeah, and hopefully it will spark a lot of interaction with the community that they'll either agree with me, not agree with me, offer some suggestions. And I think that again will be a nice learning curve, because you can go off and do your own research and stuff like that, but then you have a bias towards what you've just learned or what you've figured out and what you have in your head. But if you can spark that debate with the community, that's another opportunity to learn, meet new people, expand your biases or whatever, or get rid of those biases, and like you say, potentially open up opportunities for the business as well. So yeah, it's maybe a mountain I'm going to climb, but hey, that's what we're
I
here
will
for,
say
right?
this, like, the worst case is you have the most passionate set of conversations you've ever had your entire life, right? Because people love their tools. And in my experience, whenever the conversation comes to, like, what's the best tool, uh, everybody's very opinionated. Not to say everybody's right or everybody's wrong, but everybody's very opinionated when it comes to
Yeah.
tools.
Yeah, here. Hey ho. We'll see what
Yeah,
comes of it. Yeah,
yeah,
that's the next thing on my to-do list.
that's great. Well, I look forward to following around, and maybe I'll be very opinionated and give some feedback in there. So I'll look forward to that.
Yep.
So we're getting close to the end, so we're gonna start to wrap up now. So again, Sarah, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show and chatting with me about your career and all sorts of different really cool topics. Do you have any parting words, last things to say, plugs, things you want to let people know about that you might be working on?
Probably the best way to keep in touch with me, folks, is follow me on Twitter at TechieLass, and you'll find all the various different things and activities that I'm doing over there. But that's the platform I spend a lot of time on. So if you want an answer, hit me up on Twitter.
Yeah, I think Twitter's the best way to get a hold of people, because everybody's doom scrolling, right? Like, everybody's just on the thing all day long. So again, that's Techie Lass on Twitter. If you're not already following her, you definitely should. She's a great follow. So the last question that I love to ask my guests when they come on is, if you can think of, technology, open source, the community, all the things that you've kind of encompassed in your career and all the things that you interface with, and you could only think of one word for that, what would that be?
Fun, I
Fun.
think.
That's great.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
awesome. No,
I
I
think my
mean,
career's been laced with
perfect.
fun, Isaac.
Yeah,
There's been bad times, but the majority, there's been lots of fun. So yeah.
that's awesome. Well, again, Sarah, I want to thank you so much for being on the show and for tuning in, and for all of our audience tuning in. Enjoy the rest of your day and take care. This is Isaac Levin from Coffee and Open Source. Bye bye.